Welcome back to part 2 of UK Property News. In part 2, we will be joined by Angus Stewart, who is the founder and CEO of eco-Landlord. Angus will be answering your questions on what are the government planning with regards to changes to EPC regulations and the implication for landlords, as well as other questions around new EPC regulations. So back over to you, Ian.
Thank you, Tracy. And for this episode, we are delighted to be joined by Angus Stewart, founder and CEO of eco-Landlord. Angus, hello to you, sir.
Oh, good afternoon, Ian.
Lots to wade through on this, of course. The eco considerations of property have never been more front and centre than they are right now.
Well, absolutely. I think we're going to see quite a lot of change over the next few years, and it's going to impact our landlords in a significant way.
What are the main areas? I mean, everybody talks about EPC regulation. Talk us through that a little bit, if you would. And let's do it sort of Janet and John style, assuming nobody knows anything about this area. What is it? What do we need to know? And what's likely to change?
Okay. Well, there are some proposals out from the government. There is a consultation, which you can respond to, I think, until the 2nd of May. But they give us a good idea of the general direction of travel the government's expecting us to go in. So based on those proposals, everybody will need an EPC of a C in order to let their properties out. And the proposals are that by 2028, all new tenancies will need to have a C. And by 2030, all the rest of the properties will need to be a C. And that will give a significant challenge to many people, because of the 5 million or so private rented sector properties, over half of them are D or below. So we have a very significant way to go in terms of improving the properties that are being used by our tenants today.
Yeah. And of course, on paper, you say to somebody, do you want to improve the sort of energy efficiency of your home? Everyone goes, yeah, it's a cracking idea. Who doesn't want to make things better? However, putting that into practice and meeting this criteria, this C rating, saying it or reading it or agreeing with it and doing it are two very different things, because of course it's property dependent, but it can be pretty costly.
In some situations it will be very costly, and in some situations it may not be possible at all.
Yeah.
I think that's the challenge, given the age of some of the housing stock we have. And I think that's part of the challenge which landlords are going to have to face over the next few years. So, for example, you may be able to get, the government is suggesting that the average cost is going to be about £6,500 per property. Based on my knowledge, I think that's probably on the low side, but it's difficult to argue with the figures that they've provided within their consultation document. Yeah. But some of the measures that we might need to do to some properties could run into, I don't know, 10, 20, maybe even more £1,000. And if you've got a property that may only be worth 100,000, that's a very significant cost.
A lot of controversy around this. I mean, firstly, a lot of people say, well, you don't need all of this to sell a house, but you need one to rent one out. But nonetheless, parking that to one side. The mysterious EPC people, I'm sure things have changed from when this was first a thing, but certainly I've lost count of how many landlords I've spoken to who thought they'd done everything they could. In one particular case, she'd gone through the property, everything you needed, the cavity wall, double, triple glazing in some respects, all manner of things going on in the loft and the roof, and done everything. She was on a D rating, got the fellow around from the council, said, come and look, give us a revision of what you think it is. And he said, it's still a D. And he said, well, that's completely impossible. It can't be. Now, I'm told that the science behind this has changed somewhat. There is some credible system that is at play where an inspector, if that's the right word, will be able to accurately determine what your energy rating is. But certainly in the past, it's been anything but, agreed on, shall we say, in terms of what you need to tick.
I think you're right there, Ian. I think the EPCs we've seen to date are a bit of a mix, in a polite way. I mean, at eco-Landlord, we've took 2.5 million of the 25 million residential EPCs that are out there, and have tried to use some artificial intelligence to help us understand how accurate they are. And we've seen a broad range of EPCs. And I have to admit, I mean, I am concerned that we are making such key decisions on data which is often erroneous.
Yeah.
And in some situations, a landlord should just get another EPC because the one he's got may not be accurate. But using our tool, we can actually guide you and help you understand how accurate we believe your EPC is using this AI technology, and looking at your neighbours' properties and give you some pointers as to what you need to do to actually improve the EPC. And in some situations, it won't be possible to get to a C, but in many situations it is.
Yeah.
And this is sort of then going to get further confused by the change in the way the EPC is calculated, which is going to come in towards the end of next year. That's the current proposal, to something called the home energy model. And that might mean that some properties that are currently a C under that new model would be a D, and vice versa. So
could that also mean that somebody who'd recently elevated themselves to a C, knowing this was going to be a thing, discover that they've gone back to a D?
Well, the answer is yes on paper, but you will have grandfather rights. So if you move now, for some properties, that might be the right thing to do, and you may have a 10-year window in terms of under the old system and the old calculation. Again, this is all in the proposals, the consultation document that is out there. But I think it's important, and the government recognises they can't force everybody to do a new EPC with a very short window, because there aren't enough EPC assessors who will be trained to do that.
Yeah.
And therefore, in many instances, depending on the type of property you've got, you might want to go out there and do the measures now under the existing system rather than wait for the new home energy model. But for some other things, if you want to put a heat pump in, for example, you might find that's better under the new home energy model than it is under the current EPC calculation that you see today, the RPSAT approach. So, yeah, it's horses for courses. But
and in terms of the things that you need to do, obviously it will differ depending on the property, but is there a broad kind of loose guidance on what it's likely to be? I mean, people think, well, double glazing, lagging the loft, maybe cavity wall. Are they like the top three? Are there other issues here? What would be the kind of big ones that people need to be mindful of?
Well, I think you've got some of the big ones there, Ian. I think the other one which you might want to consider is solar, and whether or not that can help you. That can, again, improve the energy efficiency of your property, and it might actually give you a benefit to your tenant in reducing their electricity cost, or you can feed back into the national grid, so you may get some cash back from that. So you also need to look and say, well, where could I potentially get some grants? And especially if you've got tenants who are on universal credit, there may be some funding available to you through your local authority. There's something from April, the Warms Home Local Grant Scheme in most areas, which will assist. But the feedback I've had from the people I've spoken to at some local authorities is there won't be enough money to go around, because, as you can perhaps imagine, the government isn't awash with money, and so
everyone's got to, clearly, by definition, why wouldn't you? Everyone's going to try and get a grant if they can.
Well, they're going to try. I think the majority of landlords are going to be sorely disappointed that either they don't qualify, or B, by the time they get there, the cupboard is bare. So it's not something I think landlords should rely upon in the expectation they're going to get a grant, because I think in many cases the government assumes landlords have sufficient funds to do what needs to happen to improve their properties.
And just to go back to that curious way that this is calculated, your EPC rating, we had a lot of questions come through on this. I know you've touched on some of it there, Angus, but certainly there seems to be at least anecdotal evidence that it could just differ between one borough or one council and another. You could have an identical set of circumstances when it comes to what you've done to the house and it's all of the boxes that it's ticked. one house could fail as in it doesn't get to a C. Another one could be given the big thumbs up.
Yeah, I don't think we can blame the local councils or boroughs, because they're actually performed by independent individuals. You know, you could go out in and get trained tomorrow to be an energy assessor. That training course is not very long, and within a couple of days you would have a certificate that you could go out and assess properties. Now,
It's a bit bonkers, isn't it? When you look at it like that. I mean, that just seems to almost confirm certainly what a lot of landlords and investors are already thinking, that, you know, there's no full demonstrable science to this. It's a little bit random.
well, some might think that. I couldn't possibly comment. But I do think, you know, there will need to be retraining of assessors for the new home energy model. I'm hoping that we can get to a point where we get greater consistency. The one thing I would say to landlords, if you do any work on your property, keep the receipts, get a statement from the builder, whoever did the work for you. So when the assessor comes along, you can prove what you've had done.
Yeah.
Because I think part of the challenge with the assessors is, if they need to go in the loft and there's no ladder or easy access to the loft, they're going to have to make an assumption that the thing isn't lagged as effectively as you might say it is. If you've had some internal wall insulation done, but it's nicely decorated afterwards, how are they going to know without being destructive? So if you've had work done, have evidence to prove that it's done, maybe take photos of before and after. So when your assessor comes, you can demonstrate the measures you've taken already to improve that property. And I think that would help you get the right certification that you need.
There are two words that seem to be haunting this entire debate. Well, certainly the questions that we get coming through on this particular area are vast in numbers. I've done so many discussions on this. Those two words are heat pump. That there is a sort of genuine belief that the jury is kind of out on the efficiency of these things to start with. But nonetheless, this is at the moment where the green light has settled. Not every home can have a heat pump. I mean, that's point number one. The infrastructure, the kind of build, the age of the property might preclude it from that. And even if you could get a heat pump in, that isn't necessarily going to do the job you want it to do. So it is still maybe uncharted territory. Is that fair?
I think uncharted is probably fair. I think in many cases a heat pump could do things to help you. And again, especially if they change the model for calculating EPCs, I think it would actually give you more points than it does today, when today actually it can be detrimental putting a heat pump into your EPC. But I think that will change. So I know the government is keen to educate and accelerate the use of heat pumps. Indeed, that's one of the few areas where there is a significant grant available today of £7,500 if you're willing to do that. But you may find that the overall cost of that heat pump and any increased size of radiators and other things you may need to do make that a more expensive option than some of the other things you could do to improve the EPC. You may find that today it's easier to put a gas boiler in, which would, be more efficient, but that wouldn't meet the overall long-term goals of moving away from carbon fuels.
Yeah.
And so depending on how the measures work under the new home energy model, this is where you're going to start seeing some changes.
Do you think a lot of investors are turning off the gas and going electricity only in their properties?
I think it will start going that way. I mean, the issue we've got is we have an awful lot of old properties, and moving off gas when gas is still a cheaper fuel than, per kilowatt hour than electricity, skews the behaviour. I mean, I think the government needs to actually get to the point where it is eminently sensible for you to move to an electric-only environment, and then they can ensure that electricity is generated in a carbon-neutral way. But I think that's a long journey, Ian, that the country needs to go on.
And are there any exemptions? Lots of questions on that point from the criteria. Could there be a good reason that you can't get to a C, or circumstances where you would still be allowed to function as a landlord, even though you haven't hit that C rating?
Again, this is all within the consultation document. And yes, there will be areas of exemption. If at the moment, under the current system, you need to prove that you've spent £3,500 and you can't get to an E. Under the new one, it's proved that you spent £15,000 and still can't get to a C. And if you can document that, then you should be able to get an exemption and still be, for example, a D and rent your property out. And I think you need to potentially spend that every 5 years until you can get yourself up to that C. There may be some situations where it really is impossible. You may need to be able to get a surveyor to be able to, give you effectively a certificate to say it's impossible to move this property up to a C. And so there will be some exemptions within that. But I think you'll find that it still requires a significant spend from you, the landlord, to try and get it there. And I don't think it's something that many of us are going to need, be able to rely on to keep the costs down, shall we say.
Just a final point. Let's fast forward to 2030. Everything is sorted. Landlords have worked diligently, often at great expense. They've got it to a C rating. Ed Miliband is popping the champagne corks. He's dizzy on the success of his incredible scheme. And then a week later, he says, right, 2035, B rating. Any thoughts on that, Angus?
Oh, I'd be amazed if we can get to a C by 2030. My biggest concern, Ian, is there won't be enough installers to do the work within the limited period we've got over the next few years. So even if landlords work diligently towards that C target, I think achieving it is going to be quite miraculous. It'd be great if we could. I think Ed Miliband would be very happy if he could get there. I'm hoping if we can get to the C that we have a bit of a rest for a while, because I don't think forever chasing that wonderful improvement is going to be the right solution. And there are probably other lower hanging fruit that the government could use to get to their net zero target by 2050 than continually penalise the landlord. Well, I do hope so.
100%. Finally, just give us your website. Where can our viewers go to have a little look? And you mentioned as well, checking out your own on a cursory level where your property might be at the moment. Where can people find you, Angus?
Yeah, if you go to www.eco-Landlord.com, it's a free service for landlords. So you just go on there, you can check your property. And indeed, if you've got your properties in a limited company, we will automatically take the name of the company, look to see if you've got properties in any other company where you're a director, and link that into land registry and pull back all your properties, all your EPCs, and make loading up your portfolio very, very easy. So especially if you've got, I was talking to a landlord the other day who's got 127 properties, we were able to load them up within 30 seconds. Wow. And we think that's a great boon, especially for portfolio landlords.
Good work. Angus, great to have you on with us.
Thank you.
We will speak soon. That is Angus Stewart with us on the programme. Tracy, back to you.
If you want to stay up to date with the latest UK property news, make sure that you like and subscribe to our channel.